For over 150 years, the defining image of the British fairground has been the steam-powered gallopers. Since their earliest inception, these machines have captivated the hearts and minds of the British public. Originally conceived as a means for the working classes to emulate the nobility's horsemanship, to this day they still astound with their ingenious mechanisms and dazzling displays of sculpture and art. The late 19th and early 20th century truly saw the pinnacle of development of such machines, with amusement manufacturers such as Savages of King's Lynn leading the way. Savages, initially an agricultural engineering firm, became one of the premier manufacturers of amusement equipment in the late 19th century. Their development in galloper design came to set the standard in the industry. The gallopers of the late 19th and early 20th century were ornate machines, exemplifying the lavish aesthetic of the Victorian age. Generally, machines were embellished with mounts and decorative carvework, produced by the likes of Orton and Spooner of Burton-on-Trent, and Andersons of Bristol. Orton and Spooner was a partnership between George Orton, a coach builder, and his son-in-law, Charles Spooner, a woodcarver, who both came to operate separate workshops in Burton-on-Trent, catering to the requirements of fairground proprietors and ride manufacturers such as Savages. Orton's shop produced wagon work, and Spooner's the carved wooden decoration. Though not officially amalgamated until 1925, the two had been working together on projects for showmen since around 1894, and came generally to be referred to as Orton and Spooner, the name becoming synonymous with quality in the field. Later, the cooperative would become successful ride manufacturers in their own right. The basic principle of the galloper quickly became standardized. Platforms suspended from the top, which spins about the center, support concentric rings of horses, each of whom, by means of a crank arrangement in the top, raise and lower as the whole ride spins to mimic the galloping motion of a horse. The whole mechanism is driven by a steam engine mounted upon the center, or later by electric motor. Large mechanical organs also mounted in the center provided the final flourish to serenade riders and to lure potential customers to the ride. Of all the surviving sets from this golden era, perhaps one of the most dazzling, unique and original is Tuby's Victory Horses. Its story begins in the wake of the First Great War, with the well-known Doncaster-based Tuby family of showmen, headed by the enigmatic George Thomas Tuby, whose canny eye for business and gift of the gab would see him rise from selling clothesline props as a young boy, to becoming one of Britain's most successful showmen, and ultimately the mayor of Doncaster. Two of G.T. Tuby's sons, Arthur and his younger brother Harry, served during the First World War, and it was this circumstance that would see the Victory Horses come to be. When the Allied victory was declared on the 11th of November, 1918, it's easy to imagine that the thousands of men who'd volunteered to fight for 4 bloody years wanted nothing more than to return home the very next day. But such a mobilization of troops couldn't end overnight, and by 1919, thousands of volunteers and conscripts were still enlisted in the services, desperate to return to normality. The demobilization process was a complicated affair. Priority was given to essential trades like miners, known as pivotal men, and to those who had volunteered prior to 1916. Arthur Tuby likely fell into this latter category. Harry Tuby, who had served in the 179 Siege Battery Royal Garrison, was only 15 when the war broke out. He was conscripted in 1917 when he turned eligible at the age of 18, and though by 1919 Harry was finally back in England, he was still yet to be released from service. A letter sent in 1985 by the grandson of G.T. Tuby, Arthur Tuby Jr., recalled how the ride came to be and how the family managed to get Harry back to civilian life.
When I've been out with my Uncle Harry for a drink, that past has come up. And this is the story. Uncle Harry was called up for the army when he was 18 years old, and in 6 weeks was in the firing line serving with the artillery in France. November 1918 came, the end of the war, and he came back home to Doncaster. My grandfather, the late Alderman G.T. Tuby, who knew the local D-mob officer, asked if Harry could be released from the service as soon as possible, and he was told yes, if he was going to employ labor. The D-mob officer was then told by my grandfather he had a new roundabout on order, and his son was going to manage it. The machine, the victory horses.
Tuby's new ride was to be of impressive proportions, a 3-horse abreast model built to the larger specifications Savages offered. It is possible this decision was influenced by a reputed incident on their earlier 3 abreast set, nicknamed the farmyard set due to its distinctive cockerel mounts. Stories passed down through the Tuby family suggest that the centre pole of the ride snapped in 2 at one fateful Sheffield Christmas fair, jerking riders violently to one side. GT Tuby was well regarded for his interest in the safety of the public on his amusements, and the decision to invest in a heavier specification for his next set highlights that fact. Another more tragic incident on the farmyard set may have influenced the decision to forego the cockerel mounts on the newer ride. When open at the Hoyland Common Feast on the 14th of July 1914, a woman slipped from the ride whilst attempting to seat herself and a child on one of the cockerel mounts whilst the ride was starting its motion. She was thrown beneath the ride, and the fracture and infection that resulted led to her tragic death. The new ride was delivered in early 1920. It was driven by a large No. 6 model centre engine, No. 876, with an organ engine, No. 875, to drive the barrel organ mounted on the centre of the ride, most likely by Parisian manufacturer Gavioli. The organ was undoubtedly second-hand, as by this time Gavioli were already out of business. Though paper organs were ubiquitous by this point, many showmen, particularly those in the north of England, still favoured barrel organs as they could continuously play without an operator. Later, an 87-key Gavioli paper organ did appear in the ride. However, it's unclear from where or when this instrument was acquired. The carve work by Orton and Spooner incorporated symbolism appropriate to the ride's theme. Flags carved onto the rounding boards no doubt once sported the colours of the Allied nations, and a dove of peace featured, adorning the top of the particularly fine paybox. The ride boasted an impressively carved centre drum and has always been noted for its fine set of outer horses. Though a very late example, the design followed the well-established galloper aesthetic of the 19th century, including fine examples of acanthus leaf reliefs and richly ornamented egg and dart mouldings. The ride made its debut at King's Lynn Mart in February of 1920, its rounding boards still yet to be lettered. The victory horses travelled the Doncaster area for the next decade, hauled by the firm's distinctive fleet of Blue Burrell Showman's engines. The family continued to travel the farmyard set, and at some point during this time, the set was sent to Orton and Spooner for a facelift, returning with similar rounding boards to the new victory horses, and curiously now also named the victory horses, despite the ride still retaining its signature cockerel mounts. During this time, the farmyard set travelled under the management of youngest brother George, alongside the motorcar switchback, managed by Arthur. These attractions would attend one run of fairs, whilst the newer victory horses, under the management of Harry Tuby, travelled another. The farmyard set coming to resemble the true victory horses would later cause much confusion as to which set survived to the present day. Arthur Tuby Jr. clarified this in his 1985 correspondence.
The other 3 abreast had cockerels on the outside. This is the set you saw getting broken up. It was sad to see this happen to one of our family's faithful old machines. This set was still in very good condition, by the way. My Uncle George managed this ride in the 1920s. This was the older set than the victory horses. This ride was packed up when the partnership of Harry and George was created, and they bought the first set of dodgems.
The next chapter in the story of the victory horses was to be sealed at one fateful fair in late 1930, when Harry happened upon the latest fairground attraction, the Noah's Ark, a fast-moving, thrilling platform-type ride. Harry was convinced it was the ride of the future and persuaded his father that they needed an ark if they were to stay competitive on the fair. Inquiries were made to Orton and Spooner, who were already flooded with orders for this new type of ride which had originated on the continent. The Tubys wanted the new ride in time for the run of Christmas fairs they had that year in 1930, and managed to secure a deal in which the victory horses would be taken as part payment by Orton and Spooner against the new Ark. The family travelled the Ark until the outbreak of the Second World War. The victory horses remained at Orton's works, sheeted outside for 4 years, until they were sold to Thomas Drakeley of Steckford in 1934. Until at least August of 1934, the ride still featured Tuby's name on the rounding boards. When reporting on a fair in Longford near Coventry that year, the newspaper World's Fair mentioned the ride in Drakeley's ownership and noted that it was still in good condition. Drakeley travelled the ride for 12 years. He fitted the distinctive droppers previously used on the 4 abreast horses of Joseph Cox, a ride that he acquired at an earlier time. Drakeley may have also utilised several other items from the Cox's set to travel the victory horses, including a truck and cover, which came to be a sticking point in a deal to sell the 4 abreast set in 1936. Drakeley sued the purchaser, who had refused to pay the remaining balance of the asking price due to the missing elements. The judge found in favour of Drakeley and awarded him the remaining balance. The droppers remain with the victory horses to this day and form an essential part of its iconic look. During Drakeley's ownership, an 87-key Gavioli paper organ had replaced the barrel organ. What is unclear is if this instrument ever appeared in the ride during Tuby's time, if it was an instrument supplied by Orton and Spooner, or if it was acquired by Drakeley himself. What is clear is that, like the barrel organ, it would have to have been a second-hand instrument at this time. Drakeley's son-in-law, Walter Goodhead, managed the ride for him. In 1996, Walter's son, Tommy, recalled his father's time as manager of the victory horses.
My father, Walter, looked after Tom Drakeley's 3 abreast during the summer, and during the winters he ran a coal business, starting with a single horse and cart, working out of the coal yard at Steckford Station. Walter travelled the 3 abreast to small fairs in village pub car parks, where he was usually joined by Jack Smith and Old Sam Smith. This small affair joined up with more of Tom Drakeley's equipment to form the bigger fairs at more important events. My father was also steersman on Tom Drakeley's engine. As a youngster, I simply rode on the loads. My father paid 3 men 25 shillings a week plus meals to staff the 3 abreast.
During the Second World War, ownership of the ride passed through several hands within the Drakeley family until Louisa Drakeley sold the ride to Midlands-based showman Robert Wilson in 1946. The ride formed part of Wilson's extensive fair and was well travelled. Early in Wilson's ownership, the ride was converted to electric drive, replacing the original centre engine with an arrangement of lay shafts and pulleys coupled to a large electric motor to provide the necessary reduction in speed. The original centre engine was sadly disposed of. The 87-key Gavioli organ remained in service with the ride for 8 years, but in 1953, tragedy struck. Ropes from one of the sheets became tangled in the wheels of the organ truck whilst in motion. The organ was pulled off of the trailer and was smashed beyond repair. William Wilson Sr. recalls his mother's heartache at seeing a child using pipework they had salvaged from the destroyed instrument as a toy whistle. The boy was reprimanded accordingly. Robert Wilson commissioned London-based organ builders, Chiappa Limited, to supply a replacement organ for the ride. In 1954, they delivered a rebuilt 65-key Godin organ. The organ bore the name Chiappa on its front. Wilson specified that the organ be constructed in a reinforced case to avoid repetition of the previous incident. The new organ was fitted and debuted whilst the ride was open at the Charlton King Flower Show. Photographer Lionel Bathe captured scenes of Victor Chiappa working on the new organ. In 1963, the victory horses were sold to their last commercial operator, Mr. Raymond Beardo, whose name the ride's rounding boards still sport today. Beardo initially travelled the ride, with it appearing at Witney and Banbury Mop Fair that season. In 1964, Mr. Beardo installed the ride at the fairground at Woburn Abbey to replace a previous set he had operated there. Woburn Abbey, the family seat of the Duke of Bedford, is a large stately home in the county of Bedfordshire. It was first opened to the public as a tourist attraction in 1955 and has boasted numerous attractions, aside from the historic house and gardens, including a fairground, miniature railway and safari park, which opened in 1970. It is during the ride's time at Woburn that one of the most enduring mysteries of the ride's history occurred. Mr. Beardow's pitch at Woburn was close to the site's tea rooms. He is remembered as saying that there were complaints over the volume of the Godin organ installed by Bob Wilson, and so around 1965 the organ was sold and replaced with an 84-key Belgian fair organ. Mr. Beardow was well connected with showmen and circus proprietors on the continent, so it is likely that he acquired the organ direct from one of these contacts. When the new organ debuted in the ride, it featured a distinctive front painted in England, most likely in the paint shop of renowned British fairground artist Fred Fowle, whose signature font featured. The organ bore the name La Carousel, an uncharacteristically vague name for a Belgian fair organ, and featured the manufacturer's name Van der Beeck. Curiously, no such manufacturer by this name is known to exist. The origins of this instrument have long been debated. The odd manufacturer's name offers two possible clues. Van der Beeck is a close match to two Belgian organ builders, Pierre Verbeek and Julius van der Becken. The latter was a former employee of the well-known Belgian organ builders Hughes, who later built his own instruments. On the information provided on the two Decca records produced during the time, Mr. Beardow credits Pierre Verbeek with having worked on the instrument. Given this, it's clear Mr. Beardow was familiar with the name Verbeek, so it is unlikely the Van der Beek name was simply a spelling mistake. It's more probable that the name is a peculiar portmanteau. Oral history relayed to Mr. Beardow indicates that the instrument was an earlier organ rebuilt by Verbeek, so it is certainly possible that the instrument was originally constructed by Van der Becken, in which case Mr. Beardow likely thought the name was an apt moniker, given the information he inherited. When the organ arrived in England, the keyframe was mounted on the back of the case, and a continuous wheel of music was installed, a practice more familiar on Belgian dance organs. This was later removed and replaced with a salvaged 84-key Mortier keyframe supplied by Belgian music arranger and dealer Arthur Princeton. The replacement keyframe was fitted on the end of the case and remains in this position today. Mr. Beardow commissioned organ restorer Dennis Chappell to maintain the instrument in these early years in his ownership, so it was likely Chappell who undertook this work. In 1983, Chappell completely overhauled the instrument. His name is recorded inside the main chest of the organ. When the instrument was supplied, Mr. Beardow is quoted as saying that the original front was cut down to fit in the ride. Later, a second front would replace the original. Thankfully, the original version does survive, and it is thanks to this fact that the organ has finally been able to be properly identified. The organ is almost certainly the instrument constructed by Pierre Verbeek for showman Charles Benner around 1932, although it's highly likely that the instrument was indeed an earlier organ heavily rebuilt. It was most likely used in a dodgem set and travelled the Netherlands and Belgium. The original castle-themed front was largely cut down to fit inside the victory horses, but large sections of it remained, including the distinctive pillars and castellations. The organ's pipework disposition clearly matches the Benner instrument closely, including the placement of the glockenspiel. Much of the clearly visible extensive percussion section also survived, although their location was altered. The organ's chests are lined with pages from a Belgian sports newspaper called Sportwereld and date to 1927, which corroborates the suggested dates of the instrument. 2 albums of the organ were produced by Decca, Marching and Waltzing, and Come to the Fair, both of which were available to purchase as souvenirs from Woburn Abbey. Much of the ride's surviving decoration dates to this era, including Raymond Beardow's initials on the paybox. Around 1984, a young artist called Penny was hired to re-letter the rounding boards. Penny worked for many hours with Raymond Beardow Jr. to prime and prepare the required sections for painting. During this time, the pair fell in love and later married. The lettering survives to this day, as does their union. During this time, many of the horses were also stripped and repainted. Raymond Beardo Jr., recalls the bottom layer of decoration, revealing that the horses were originally largely covered in gold leaf, explaining the original rounding board motto, "The Grand Galloping Stud of Golden Victory Horses." In 1991, Mr. Beardo had the organ converted to electric control, utilising an early Allen Pell harmonist system, and commissioned the second facade, and a full reconditioning of the instrument by the Fussell brothers. At the end of 1991, the ride was removed from Woburn Abbey to have its centre rebuilt by Rundle's, an amusement and agricultural engineering firm in Lincolnshire, ready for its debut at its last commercial pitch. The following season, it was to open at Breen Leisure Park in Somerset, where it would remain until 1997. In April of 1992, the managers of Breen Leisure Park advertised the addition of a new thrill attraction, a German-made rainbow ride, and stated that in addition to this, in order to maintain an air of nostalgia, they were installing a 100-year-old set of galloping horses. Interestingly, the Victory horses were only 72 years old at this point. In 1997, the ride featured heavily in an episode of the BBC children's television series Rosie and Jim, titled Roundabout. This would be one of the last documented uses of the ride in commercial use prior to it entering preservation.
What a brilliant merry-go-round!
Jim, what a brilliant merry-go-round!
Rosie, that merry-go-round is going round and round
And up and down!
and up and down. Oh, it stopped.
Oh, I fancy a ride on that.
Oh, no! Jim, I fancy a ride on that merry-go-round.
Yeah, Rosie, I'd like to have a go on that merry-go-round.
At the end of the 1997 season, the ride was sold upon Mr. Beardo's retirement. The Victory horses were acquired by collector and preservationist Russell Cook, who assembled a team to restore the ride. Mr. Cook acquired a replacement Savage centre engine, number 529, to facilitate returning the ride to steam operation, although it can still be operated electrically. The Beeck organ was reconditioned by Andrew Whitehead of Stratford-on-Avon. New transport was built in the form of 2 4-wheel trailers, so the ride could once again travel. The ride itself was carefully conserved and restored, preserving originality where possible, and conserving many historic sections of fairground paintwork. Replacement paint was carefully matched to traditional designs, and damaged carve work was painstakingly repaired. The ride made its debut in restored condition in 2004 at the Ackworth Historic Vehicle and Steam Show. Since 2015, the ride has been on long-term loan to the Fairground Heritage Trust at their Dingles Museum. It has formed one of the centrepieces of the Trust's working collection as a perfect working example of a traditional British set of gallopers. The Victory horses represent the pinnacle of British galloper building, a late example built to the tradition of the 19th century. Their story is unique and fascinating, and highlights the important social history intertwined with the story of the British fairground. Today, the ride survives largely unchanged from its original form, but with evidence from each stage of its long and interesting history carefully preserved. The ride features excellent examples of early 20th century fairground carved decoration throughout, as well as many preserved sections of fairground paintwork from most stages of its life. The organ which survives with the ride is a rare and unusual instrument, whose history has been married to the ride for nearly 60 years since its last commercial use. Tuby's Victory horses is more than just a ride, it's a living piece of history. A rare survivor of a bygone era, this iconic fairground attraction stands as a testament to the ingenuity and craftsmanship of the artisans of days gone by. As it continues to spin, it carries with it the echoes of generations past, a reminder of the joy and wonder that has captivated fairgoers for over a century.